Welcome to Test Chamber 4. The Enrichment Center regrets to inform you that this next test is impossible. Quit now, and cake will be served immediately.
I want cake.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG here to give you the results from the first big tournament of Shadows over Innistrad Standard season. This was the Star City Games Open in Baltimore. Had a lot of big-name players there, veterans, and some up-and-coming rookies that have had some really good showings lately, at least. So let's see what they play, because it's really important to analyze the format while it's early, to see what can be tweaked, see what's still in sort of the early stages of development, and see what is right along in a very strong deck already. So let's take a look at what we got. Finishing in 8th place was Dwayne Graham, no stranger to top 8s, and he played Green-White Humans, a deck that a lot of people called and have wanted to see too on the channel. I've already talked about it. I'm going to build it. I mean, it builds itself, right? You play Sigarda, right? No. This deck does not play Sigarda, as a matter of fact. This deck is, again, very low to the ground, which makes a lot of sense. Very early on in formats, aggro is often a very good deck type, because a lot of people are trying to set up their flashy new tricks with their cool interactions and experiment with things early on in the format. And aggro will just go right up under everything. You know, fastest deck wins. Fastest deck wins. And this is one of the faster strategies in the format. You'll see that a lot of decks we cover today are like this deck. Very popular idea in this tournament, at least, to just throw a bunch of, white aggro cards together. Really, a lot of decks are base white aggro that splashes a color, or in some cases, or at least one case, not at all, just mono white. Rather than Sigarda, this deck played Tireless Tracker as the lone green card in the main deck. It's a good card too. A lot of people playing it over the weekend. It lets you go a lot deeper into your library than you normally would in a deck like this. As far as the board goes, the deck plays another couple of important green cards. In Clip Wings is really good because we have a lot of flyers that we're scared of, from Ojutai, definitely making a comeback, to both of the Archangels, to Olivia and other Sigarda, So Clip Wings just looks really good out of the sideboard. And the sideboard also plays Ulvenwald Mysteries. Ulvenwald Mysteries looked weird to me when I first saw it. And then I realized that obviously this is against things like, Languish and Chandra, which is an incredibly important card in the format, it would seem. And it just helps you recover really easily from those. This next deck was actually number 7 and 6, picked up 2 slots in the top 8, and was really hotly speculated on before the weekend started. This may be the number 1 most talked about deck. Just before the weekend started, actually. This is Blue-White Humans, and it was piloted by Colin Stiles and Christopher Giuliano. And I'll use Colin's version here because it finished 6th, a little bit higher. So this is similar to the last deck, but this one jams Ojutai and Reflector Mage because, first of all, Reflector Mage, hell yeah. I mean, why not play Reflector Mage? It's a human, first of all, and it's just one of the best cards in the format. Ojutai obviously interacts well with Always Watching because it's just basically always hexproof forever. And, is a 6-power guy. That's pretty good, too. So in Reflector Mage, I have to come back around to him. He's just better than ever. Bounce is really good right now. And there's really not much more to say, I guess, about this deck, This deck does play a slightly higher top end, so it'll have more reliable finishes and just really good interactions. Also, I didn't mention this in the last deck, but for all these white aggro-based decks, I have to point out the amazing synergy between Always Watching and Archangel of Ties, because, it's similar to Ojutai, he's always hexproof, he's always online. This is always online. Both abilities are always online if you have an Always Watching out, and an Archangel of Ties, which can be just insane. Archangel just really came into her own over the weekend, and a lot of people wanted this card to be good. It turns out it is. It beats, or at least survives. Languish survives a fresh Chandra that they just dropped. So, and those are, again, that's just very important to be able to do that. So Archangel is an amazing card in this format. The deck that finished number 5 was Black-White Midrange by Blake Conti. A lot of people also called this deck, everyone knew that Black-White Midrange was a thing in the format because it just plays all the best cards. Abzan, Abzan apparently we're supposed to call it. No, I just like Abzan. But that deck just played all the best cards and was the best deck for, like a year. So if this deck is reminiscent of that, it just plays the good cards. This is basically Orzhov Planeswalker control, sort of Super Friends. And that's more or less it, Super Friends, and play all the good cards. It plays 17 cards that can remove things. And it plays Avacyn and Sorin, just 2 of the best threats in the entire format. Gideon's in there just doing stuff, and he's still a pretty good threat in the format. Ailey is in there. She can help flip your Avacyn. That's important. Or you can just secure the waste and get Westfield Abbey to flip just out of nowhere. So, the deck has a lot of different paths to victory and a lot of different ways to stave off until the mid-game. It's really, really good mid-range deck in the format and will probably be the defining mid-range deck in the format. I think this deck has a lot of staying power. I don't think it's a flash in the pan or anything. I think this will be an important deck moving on here. And we'll see what tweaks get made, probably mostly to the removal base. To this deck, because really a lot of the threats are just insane. If the deck gets to the 5th, 6th turn, then crazy stuff's going to start happening. The board is just basically more removal in these two colors, but it's also interesting that it plays 3 Pitiless Horde, at least in Blake's version. That's probably for the dash. That's really good again against mass removal. That's sorcery speed, Languish, Chandra. We see a lot of people trying to get around those 2 cards in this format, and Pitiless Horde is at least a way to do it, and especially against decks that are more less board centric, we'll say, don't have as much of a board presence. Pitiless Horde is actually really good. The deck that came in 4th was Blue-Red Control, he called it, piloted by the legendary Todd Anderson. He's been in Magic circles for years now, pretty prolific guy, and he knows what he's doing, so something like this looks actually pretty janky at first glance, and a lot of people have called this, I didn't necessarily call it, a lot of people called it in the comments section. They've been wanting this deck. And Todd, obviously, like I said, he knows what he's doing. The deck looks weird. It looks like it sort of plays half like an Is It Tutelage deck. It's got the Magmatic Insights, the Tormenting Voices, got a lot of low-to-the-ground stuff, 4 of, play sets of Lightning Axe and Fiery Temper. It's a good combo. But obviously, this is all basically 1-mana stuff at its best. But it also plays like a mid-range deck because it swings for the fences with Chandra and Pyromancer's Goggles, which just looks super fun. And the best thing really about it is that this deck, of all the decks in the top 8, really looks like it's still in the beta stage of development. It has a lot of room to grow. It looks like there's really going to be a lot of tuning to be done with this deck, and we'll see what happens from there. But it's a really good concept. We can just win off of Thing in the Ice, and Jace is still obviously a card. It is important to note that Jace was only in 2 of the top 8 decks over the weekend, so hopefully Jace is a little less important, but I doubt it. I really, really doubt it. Jace is still insane in this format. Sorry, he just kind of is. Just Madness, Delirium, he facilitates those so well. So this is, again, just the weirdest deck ever, but there's definitely things that can be done with it, and we'll see where it goes from here. As far as the board goes, it plays a playset of both Fevered Visions and Eldrazi Obligator, which is, that's kind of weird. Obligator has been a good sideboard card now for a few months. People like the card. So that makes sense. Fevered Visions, I'm just not, maybe it helps you flip the thing a little bit faster. Drawing cards is always good, so I'm just, I think there's, again, a lot of work to be done with this thing. But if it caught 4th place at the first big tournament, that means that any improvement that it makes at this point is just going to make it an amazing deck. It's obviously already still a presence. The number 3 deck, we got into the top 3 here, is White-Black Eldrazi, piloted by Eric the Hammer Heimel, I'll call him. He's an up-and-comer. He's had some good finishes lately. And called it on this one. We've been playing White-Black Eldrazi for a couple of months now, and I've had the deck built now for a while. It's just on the schedule to be released. And it's very similar to what Eric's come up with here. Again, we just play a lot of the best cards, so the deck sort of builds itself. It's a lot like the White-Black mid-range deck, except it jams in Thought-Knot Seer and Eldrazi Displacer, because Eldrazi Displacer is freaking crazy. Not only is it obviously good with Thought-Knot Seer, we all know that by now, but you can displace Avacyn, which is just feels like cheating. You can flip the Avacyn, and that's a crazy in-game strategy, but the deck has all the in-game strategy already. I mean, again, just insane threats available to us. And in this deck, we have Hedron Crawler, which helps us ramp into Sorin on turn 5, a turn faster than the other decks that will be playing him, and that's actually really nice and probably very important. The board is typical in that it just plays staple removal for these colors again, but this one throws in 2 copies of Reality Smasher for more beats, and I don't know if maybe the deck is not comfortable playing Reality Smasher in the main deck because all the madness going around. Maybe that's it. And sure, Fiery Temper proved to be a very important card over the weekend, so I can see maybe playing Reality Smasher board. That does make sense. But when you do get to play Reality Smasher sort of guilt-free and not have to worry about madness, that card is just crazy. So the deck has all the in-game possibilities, and again, all the early game removal. So White-Black is just an incredible color combination right now. The number 2 deck over the weekend was Mono White Humans. We call it Mono White Beats. This is another deck I've had planned, and actually it's the next deck coming up. Although mine is a little bit more Angel-centric than Kellen Pastore's here. And Kellen Pastore's been really finishing very well lately. He did very well with, I think it was Lantern Control and Modern, and he's very varied in what he can do. He's finished well in Legacy and Modern and Standard, so good player this guy is. But his deck is incredibly low to the ground. The deck I've built is much more mid-rangey and plays Archangel and Avacyn. Sort of like the other mono-white decks, that splash another color that we've already covered today. But this one is just all in mono-white aggro, as low to the ground as possible, very, very fast creatures. And most decks over the weekend played that second color. But this one was so much faster and more focused. That was important too. And as previously stated, the fastest deck wins at the beginning of formats a lot of the time. And this was by far the fastest deck over the weekend. This deck also, by the way, I want to point out, plays Griff's Boom, which is another thing I called #humblebrag in the Sleepers video. And there were a couple people in the comments like, I don't know about Griff's Boom, bro. And Griff's Boom is really, really good in this deck because it can get through a huge cult leader or a big Thalia's lieutenant. It can get it through really easily. And if you do get swept by mass removal, which is something that all decks are worried about in the format, then you can get it back. So that can be important. The deck also sort of boards into a Westvale Abbey deck because it adds Gideon, it adds Secure the Waste, and it adds 2 more Westvale Abbeys. So just really through the board you have the ability to go all in for Westvale Abbey. So really interesting deck here. I like it a lot. And the #1 deck of the weekend, first big tournament of the Shadows over Innistrad Standard season, is Bant Company by the legendary Jim Davis. Not the author of Garfield, that guy. But Jim Davis, he's been in Magic circles for a while now, very prolific writer and player. And we also sort of called this one, months ago, well, a month or so ago now. We did a Bant Company deck tech, and I remember saying, this deck survives rotation very well. It doesn't lose hardly anything. Collecting Company is going to be very important. And here it is, #1 at the first weekend. But there are probably some explanations for that. The deck's been good for months now, and nobody's surprised by it. And it's very familiar to the people that play it. People have been playing this deck and learning its different interactions and ins and outs for a couple of months now, and that gave, a lot of people in the top 8 have only been playing these decks for, a couple of weeks, a month at the most. So they just haven't had all the time to really learn the ins and outs. Whereas a deck like Bant Company is well established in the format, and that may be because that may have helped it win over the weekend. But as we begin to acclimate to Shadows, things will get tuned enough to maybe knock this off its perch. I would say that's pretty likely. This deck, however, does add some cool stuff. It adds a Duskwatch Recruiter, which I don't know that I saw coming, but it makes a lot of sense because obviously Company doesn't play too many non-creature spells. And it also adds Tireless Tracker, which we've already talked about. Tireless Tracker, though, is pretty amazing. And this deck also jams a card. It jams Archangel Avacyn like a lot of these decks have. This is the true meaning of jamming a card. Double white doesn't look extremely reliable. And if it were super reliable, then the deck would probably play Knight of the White Orchid to make sure it could get to its Avacyn. But it doesn't. It doesn't get double white very well, it looks like. Although it does play the 3 planes. So it really wants to get double white. But it doesn't look super reliable, and you can't get this off Company, which is usually the criteria for any creature in a company deck. But even at 5 mana, this is worth it to play for players, apparently. And it makes a lot of sense. We just could play all the creatures in a company deck, so something like Avacyn is just insane. And the board of this deck adds a few extra copies of a lot of creatures in the deck. It adds Negate, and amazingly, this is the best thing about the board. It adds 2 copies of Invocation of Saint Traft. Nobody could have possibly seen that coming. This is in the 75 of the #1 deck of the first the first big tournament of the season. I'm pretty tickled by that. By the way, I could say I sort of called that one. Just the other day we did Blue White Spirits and I gushed about how good Invocation of Saint Traft was. Here it is in the board of the #1 deck over the weekend of the first big tournament, so yay. That's it for the top 8 from the first big tournament. We're going to keep following and see what happens in Shadows Standard here. Big tournament, the Pro Tour, actually. Pro Tour Shadows of Innistrad begins Friday, April 22nd. I believe they're doing limited that day, and it'll start, I believe, Saturday with Standard. So, but I may be wrong on that. I'm pretty sure that's how it's going. But it starts on Friday the 22nd, and, players have a little less than 2 weeks at this point to formulate strategies, go back to the drawing board and figure out exactly what they want to do to sort of take down the big strategies in the format. Maybe play more Hallowed Moonlight in the sideboard. Languish wasn't as important as people thought it was, but it was still fairly important. Chandra probably was as important as people thought she was, although she didn't show up too much in the top 8 either. But, that's probably because people were game planning so much against her specifically. So, all of that happened. We'll see how things happen from here and where, how players sort of shift as the metagame evolves, because the metagame has a lot of evolution to go through at this point. If you enjoyed this content, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button, just hit the like thing. That helps us more than anything else you could possibly do. Other than go to the comments, this helps a lot. Go to the comments and give me moral support, like, hey, that was a good video. Or tell me if it was a bad video, because, if it was, that you should tell me. That I should know those things. And I'll see you guys later. Sub if you're new, and keep on watching. I appreciate you guys stopping by. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.